everyone, and welcome to the Musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane. You know, Don's had quite a career in radio and television, where he's been an air personality, a news anchor, even a TV weatherman.
And John's been a college professor. He's written several books, and he's been an editor and features writer at the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper.
We first teamed up for a radio show in college. On one show, we introduced a soothing musical interlude.
But we stumbled, and it came out Musical Innertube.
And that became the name for this here podcast, where we talk with interesting people about their interesting lives. Difference makers who really make a difference.
Today we are thrilled, ecstatic, and slightly terrified to have as our guest on the Musical Innertube, Katherine Ramsland, a true Renaissance person if ever there were one. Katherine is a professor of criminal justice and forensic science at DeSales University, but that only scratches the surface. She's an expert on crime scene investigation, psychological sleuthing, serial killers and mass murders, vampires, sex offenders, and ghosts, and the writing process, I might add, and she's an enthusiastic and super talented angler, as in catching fish. She's written more than 60 books, including both fiction and nonfiction, and more than 1,000 articles, count them, on one or more of these wide-ranging areas of intellectual investigation. I might add, she's a longtime friend of mine and has somehow survived the experience. She's here today to talk about her new book, The I Scream Man, a real Ramsland rip snorter, and you should buy it and read it right now. But I get the feeling we'll range around subject-wise with one of my favorite people. Welcome, Katherine Ramsland.
It's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Let's start with The I Scream Man. It begins when a boy goes missing, and Annie Hunter, a genius crime investigator, assembles this team of talented sleuths known as the Nutcrackers. I have two questions to start us off. The first is the subtitle, which on the cover is A Nutcracker Investigation. That makes me hope this is the first of a series. Is that true or not? And number two, to what, if any, extent is Annie your alter ego, or is she writing you?
Well, she is certainly the closest to me of any character that I have talked about. Ice Cream Man is the beginning of a series, but there's already a short story actually published, a couple of short stories published about this Nutcrackers team, and they call the Nutcrackers because they take on hard nuts to crack. They always take on twisty, weird cases, often with paranormal rumors attached to them. And they do go out to debunk them quite often. So Annie has my attitudes about all of this. She grew from a producer saying to me when I was pitching something else, "Why aren't you writing what you do?" And she was right.
Mommy.
So Annie is a forensic psychologist who runs a PI investigation agency. So she has a network of consultants. I've used a lot of different people in my own investigations. She's a suicidologist, which is what I am as well. So she consults with coroners and medical examiners. And she loves having adventures, and she lives on the Outer Banks where I wish I lived.
And, this is such good news that we're going to have more of these because it's such a fun book to read. But of course, as with all of your books, fiction or nonfiction, one learns so much, and there's so much that's just fascinating and challenging. And I'm wondering, can you describe the individual members of the Nutcrackers?
Okay, I certainly can. They live with me constantly. And I'm actually done writing the second of the series. So I've been certainly with these characters. One is Annie, of course. She runs the agency. She has a friend and a comrade, someone that she keeps very close, her confidant, is Natra, who's actually based on someone I used to work with who was a dog handler, and she was half Cherokee. So she had a lot of spiritual connections. We'd go to powwows together, so I decided to base a character on her. And then her PI is Aiden, and he is a super PI with kind of an HDD mentality. He's always got his motor running, but he's really good at it. But he's also kind of a gig worker where he'll do other pickup things, doesn't have any particular sense of direction. But once he's on a case, he's terrific. And then she also teams up with an attorney from a different state because he's a child welfare advocate attorney. And so all the cases in the book are about missing kids and kids being framed for murder and whatnot in juvenile facilities because it's a sex trafficking network. And she also has a digital examiner who works part-time, who used to be my neighbor. so my characters are based on actual people that I have worked with.
The story involves children who are in juvenile facilities and being moved around and being used by the people who run those facilities for nefarious means. You might have referenced it somewhere in the text. I'm trying to remember, but John and I both covered the judges up in Scranton.
Right.
A very famous case a few years ago where there were 3 judges that were in charge of juvenile court, and they also owned interests in juvenile facilities.
Right.
They were eventually arrested and prosecuted and taken off the bench because a kid would come before them for a very slight crime and be sentenced to one of these juvenile facilities that the judges were then getting a kickback on. So did that have anything to do with how you put this book together?
Yes, and actually in one of the conversations when the attorney, Jackson Rains, talks to Annie, he references the Kids for Cash case in Pennsylvania because that was an inspiration to me, and it was kind of combined with an investigation that I had been doing in Savannah on the Jim Williams case with the idea that the young man he murdered, Danny Hansford, he had been using him to procure other boys for high-placed individuals, particularly politicians. And so we had heard rumors of that. So I've kind of put those 2 cases together to be able to write the plot of this book. But the Kids for Cash, I thought was really interesting because so many different people were part of that connection. It wasn't just the judges. It was the people who worked in their courtrooms. There were cops who were in on it. It was quite an interesting network. And so, yes, it definitely influenced me.
I'm wondering, Katherine, a big role is played in The Ice Cream Man by something called remote viewing. What exactly is that, Dr. Ramsland?
I just love remote viewing because the military used to use this. They used to train people to actually help them figure out where fugitives were, where try to spy on other countries with this thing. And essentially it's a way, it's kind of a psychic thing. In fact, most of the remote viewers who were really talented had some kind of psychic component to it. But it's basically a real-time thing where somebody goes to a place, if you're training or testing this method, someone goes to a place and the other person draws what's coming to them, and then they compare the drawing to what it's called the outbounder, what the outbounder is near. So the outbounder is at a monument or some kind of building, and so they're looking at it, and supposedly the remote viewer gets a sense of what they're seeing, and they will draw that, and that's corroboratable. So that's something, I have a lot of mediums and psychics who say things that they can't be corroborated, so for me, and for Annie, it's like, okay, so what? I can make up stories like that too. But if somebody's actually at a facility that has unique aspects to it, and the person who's drawing does not know where they are, but they do draw something that's very similar, that is a corroboration. And the Army and there were other arms of the military that were using this, but then it sort of got out to taxpayers that dollars were going to psychic spies. So the program supposedly collapsed, but I'm not certain that it actually did. There's some really great pieces written about it, but it went for, I think, several decades.
Well, in the book, you do talk about psychics and seances and that sort of thing. And I will say that Annie, the main person in your book, the main character, doesn't seem to necessarily buy into all that stuff. So is that kind of where you are too? Some of the stuff you think is legitimate and a lot of the stuff you think is probably phony?
I want to believe. However, I'm not going to believe just anything I hear. I do see a lot of so-called mediums hooking into wishful thinking and desperation. Annie tells a story that I actually witnessed of a medium telling a woman, he could read her dead pet's mind, and he loved hanging his head out the window, and she'd be like, "Yeah, yes, he did." And Annie says, "Okay, I could have told her that for half price," but and that's sort of Annie's kind of snarky in that way, but also she's very clear-eyed about the way people get exploited by mediums who can easily make up stories and can read all kinds of cues from people. So she's always on the lookout for the real thing. And she doesn't think there's no real thing. She's not a total skeptic, but she can be hired to evaluate for people who, for example, somebody with a missing child who doesn't want to be seen going to a psychic. Annie can be hired to evaluate whether this person has anything to offer or not, which is what she does at the scavenger house. She goes and this is actually a thing that happened to me. I was at this house, and it's not named the scavenger house, but I was at this house when I was watching one psychic, and a different one came up and started talking to me about someone else. And so that scene that's at that house is real, actually. But Annie does have that attitude, and her attitudes about it are pretty much mine.
Yeah, because the thing that always amazed me was watching, and a lot of them were on television. They don't seem to be much anymore. But the guy who stands in a audience and says, "I'm getting a K. Is that right? No. I'm getting an M. Is that right? No.
Right.
He just goes through the alphabet until he lands on one that seems to mean something to somebody."
He was outed though as. Like he had microphones under the seats where people were sitting, and then always had a delay so that people would start talking about who they expected to see. And he had he also had researchers. So if they paid by credit card, he could go find out things about them and who was dead and who they expected. And whenever he was caught out saying, if he was telling somebody something about their cousin no, that's not right. Then but that's what they're telling me. So you really need to listen to what they're saying. Or, no, they're fading now. It wasn't for you after all. So they always have that. And that bugs Annie. and she's especially bugged by psychics and mediums who say things like there was one case where the guy said he knew who killed him. Okay. What's the next part? They never seem to get to that part. So in my opinion, if you have only so much breath for some reason, and don't waste it on the first part of the sentence, tell us the important part of the sentence.
Right. Yes.
But that's where it always ends. And I had this happen to me with this particular case that I was working on, where they were saying, he's got a list of names of people who are involved in this sex trafficking network, and he buried it in water, and he wants you to buy some hip boots to go get it. And I'm like, I will buy the hip boots when he tells me where it is. Until then, I'm not doing it. And they would sort of go, he's going to tell you, but right now he's watching Army Wives, so he's distracted. Like, okay, that's stupid. I just think that's so stupid. And so I love putting that in Annie's voice, because these are things that I actually encounter, and it just drives me nuts.
Back in the day, you and I used to talk about this a lot, Katherine, and one of the many things that you taught me is that there's a certain there's a certain degree to which people with extraordinary insights or extraordinary sensitivities are used by investigators. And some of this is explainable, as certain kinds of just remarkably sensitive reasoning. And some of it really people don't care about explaining it because it has a result down the line. And one of the things you said to me is it's really a mistake to write off the whole thing because you never know when you have someone who can be useful to you.
And right. And I do include a story that happened to me in New Orleans with one of these fakies, psychics who sit around Jackson Square, and ask for $5 or $10 for a quickie prediction. And the guy actually went, "Oh my God, I see two mountains. I feel a cold wind coming from the west." And that morning, my friend in Flagstaff outside the two San Francisco peaks died. so he might have been a fake, but he caught something in the air. Because right when he said it, I went right to the phone and my friend had just died, and it was two mountain peaks and it was in the west.
Yeah,
so there you go.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think many of us have had experience,
Yes.
I guess you could call it, of the uncanny.
Well, yeah. My wife told a story quite a bit about being asleep and dreaming that an ant came and sat on her bed and talked to her. And of course, this was right as the ant was dying.
Yeah.
So, again, I guess dreams are a very potent part of this too. Is that right?
They are. And I spend a lot of my time chasing down these stories because I do want to believe. But I want corroboration. Why shouldn't I have that? Other people get it, so why can't I? Why can't Annie?
Right.
But also, she has a special interest in that her father is missing. Everybody thinks he committed suicide, but she thinks it's pseudocide, which is people faking their death. And she knows that he was on the trail of what are these mysterious vanishments in certain types of places. So she has a special reason why she wants to find an authentic person who can help her with this.
That's there's so many things that are fascinating about the ice cream man, but the figure of Annie, so much great stuff. And of course, we've been talking to you here for 15 minutes. We're already learning about such interesting things. And of course, it all takes place in the book. It's so much fun to watch it get worked out in a fictional framework, which at the same time, having known you for so long, I found, really sort of familiar, of working these questions out, because they're not just philosophical questions. They're actually quite practical ones when you're looking for ways to solve many of these crimes, which call on extraordinary measures many times.
Well, and I did co-wrote a book with a person who runs Ghosts of Gettysburg out in Gettysburg. And we wrote a book called Blood and Ghosts, Paranormal Forensic Investigations, where and we do Haunted Crime Scenes Weekend in Gettysburg. So the idea is that when you come to dead ends with forensics and there's still these open things, can you use paranormal kinds of tools? That's his part of it. I do the forensic part, and also question some of the paranormal forensics. But I still really enjoy doing the work with him and seeing some of the things we can get, because sometimes it surprises me.
Well, what exactly? Gettysburg is very close to where I live, and of course, thanks to the Civil War, there are thousands and thousands of ghost stories. What did you find when you went to Gettysburg?
Well, and he's written, I think, 9 Ghosts of Gettysburg books. So, he's the expert on all the ghost stories there. And we used to do investigations also. One time we were in the ghost house, which is the office where they run the investigations. I used to stay overnight there. And we set up a camera, and they in the ghost house, they have a picture that one of the people who were waiting for a tour took, and you can see the image of a little boy. And then separately, before that image was taken, a medium came in and said, "There's a little boy in here, and he likes to play with marbles." And you can, and I've stayed overnight there, and I've heard the sound, and also sound of footsteps on the stairs. Yeah, it scares me, of course. But we set up a camera once, and we got an image of 2 balls of light sort of moving in front of the camera, and a voice recorded that said, "Catch me." So things like that. I don't know what it means, but it's certainly interesting when you have a convergence from different sources of all this little boy stuff.
I have to tell you, when I worked in television in Harrisburg, Gettysburg is part of the area we cover, and we went down there, and there is a Gettysburg College has a few buildings that are said to be haunted. They date back to the Civil War. And we went into a particular building that's an administration building now for the college. And they said down in the basement where all of the HVAC stuff is now, the heating and cooling stuff, that had been a hospital during the war. And two women who had gone to lunch went into the elevator and hit the wrong button, and it opened in the basement, and they said they saw a Civil War hospital with groaning patients, and a doctor reached out to them and said, "Great, the nurses are here," and the door shut before he could grab either of them. And
that's in my friend's book.
Is that?
Okay. Mark Nesbitt is the guy who wrote that, and talked to the women. And there was one other person who had this same experience. I've been in that basement. Of course, nothing happened for me, but
no. I was going to say, I went in there with a cameraman, and we went down to the basement, and he was filming the whole time. And I thought, isn't this going to be great if it opens up and it's a basement? But it was just HVAC stuff.
Right.
Nothing ghostly in there, unfortunately.
And that happened to me. And but we have two different stories of that surgery. Very gruesome, obviously, during the Civil War. So I don't know. Those things. That's what I want. I want to have that happen. So I'm willing to stay overnight in Lizzie Borden's house and all these other places to see.
Which you did, didn't it?
Which I
did.
You
did that, didn't you? Yes.
I did do that. Yep.
And I would have paid to do anything else that night. That would have scared the bejesus out of me.
It did scare me, but that's the fun.
Oh boy. So, Katherine, are you one of these people who are like, you're like, if I were to attach electrodes to you and it puts you on a roller coaster, you'd just be a flat line on a screen, or are you scared by roller coasters? Are you scared by stuff?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm scared of, not as scared of ghosts as I was before I did all this work, but yeah, if I was once, there was a place called the 1790 House in Savannah, and the ghost supposedly gets in bed with you. So, I'm up for that. And it was pitch black. And I'm going to tell you, every noise was like, who's there? Who's there?
Man.
And then, of course, nothing happened. But yeah, I was scared all night. But roller coasters don't appeal to me, but staying overnight in haunted places, that'll get to me. But I also really like doing it.
We'll return to our show in just a moment, but first, here's a soothing musical interlude.
Our guest, Katherine Ramsland, is an expert on many things, including crime scene investigation, psychological sleuthing, serial killers and mass murderers, vampires, sex offenders, ghosts, and the writing process.
Katherine has written more than 60 books and 1,000 articles, has participated in many crime investigations, and is a blogger at Psychology Today and a frequent guest in the television and podcast world, including her recent work as executive producer on Roku TV's Murder House Flip.
Among her nonfiction books are Confession of a Serial Killer, The Criminal Mind, and The Science of Vampires, True Stories of CSI, and Snap, Seizing Your Aha Moments.
Her fiction books include Blood Hunters, The Heat Seekers, and many others. Her most recent fiction work is The I Scream Man, a nutcracker investigation available at all good book venues.
For more on this truly Renaissance personality, check out her Facebook page at facebook.com/kath.ramsland, Ramsland, or follow her on Facebook at Kat Ramsland. Again, that's KAT, capital RAMSLAND.
And now we return you to the musical Innertube.
How did you get started in all this?
Probably from my mother when I was a little kid. She started me reading ghost stories as first as primers. Basically, if there was a ghost story to be had, she was there. And I think, and she saw things I've never seen anything like she has seen. So I have to attribute it to her. But even so, my mother has passed, and she knows I want to see a ghost. And where is she? Is what I want to know.
Well, that's right. Yeah. Let me ask you, since you talked about Lizzie Borden and some of these experiences that you've had, on the extremities of crime. Could you talk a little bit about something you've written a book about, your correspondence with Dennis Rader, known as the BTK killer? I'm wondering how you got entree to talking to this serial killer. By the way, BTK stands, I believe, for bind, torture, kill.
Right.
And here's a man who evidently was a serial murderer for several years, then stopped, became
No.
or maybe he didn't stop.
That's the myth about him. Yeah.
Okay, so he kept going, but he also did things like being a Boy Scout leader and things like this. So I wonder when you got on, how did you get entree to him to begin the correspondence?
Okay, but hold that thought, because I want to circle back to the ice cream man for another serial killer that actually came out of that same instance. But let me first talk about Rader, because this is all related in an odd way. So with Dennis Rader, he was arrested in 2005 for the murder of 10 people in Wichita, Kansas, from starting 1974 to 1991. When he was arrested, a young woman approached him. She wanted to write his book, and he took her on. And 5 years passed, and I saw her on Facebook, and I said, "Whatever happened to your book?" And she begged me to please step in and do the book because she didn't want to. So that's how I got in it. But then I had to be vetted by the victims' families, because they would get the proceeds, the majority of the proceeds, from anything, with him, because he had signed over his life rights to them under this other woman's guidance.
Yes,
which is fine with me. That was fine for me. This was an opportunity to really work with a serial killer up close and personal. I reported on many of them, but this was going to be very intense. So I didn't care what the terms were, but it still took some time. And also he wanted me to solve some codes, because that's how he wanted to work, was through coded messages. In part, that was because he didn't want the guards to know what we were doing, which that was practical, but then also he fancied himself a spy. So it's kind of a game. And for me, that's behavior. I'm not coming at him like a detective who needs to know the truth. I'm coming at him. I want to read every aspect of his behavior, from the manipulations and the lies and the truths and the codes and whatever it was. We also started a chess game by mail. So it was very interesting, all the various layers. But in addition, I was good friends with the DA on the case, and she had a whole stash of stuff she was willing to show me. And I also got the police interrogation tapes. And, so I had a massive amount of material. And I worked with them for 5 years, which is the longest I've ever spent on any book. I worked with them for 5 years. We did produce the book, and then that ended up as a 4-part documentary on A&E, and I got to be an executive producer for that. So I had, my fill with all of the Hollywood stuff as well, and that was a lot of time spent in that. I still talk to him. I've been talking to him now for 12 years, and it was an amazing experience. It produced what I called a guided autobiography, which was his life, his dark journey, as he called it, but with the aim of benefiting criminal justice, forensic psychology, and law enforcement. So I guided him toward things that I thought would help us, and not just him blathering on and on about himself. And I think it worked out. I think that's exactly the kind of product I produced, and I was very happy with that. But sort of back to the ice cream man, when I went to the scavenger house, we'll call it, because that's what I call it in the book, a woman approached me. The psychic approached me and told me that the ghost that was there wanted to talk to me and tell me about that I understood what had happened to him. And he said, not the ice cream man. She said, I'm hearing something like Candy or Candy Man, which opened my eyes because I had just written about Dean Corll, the Candyman serial killer from Houston, Texas, from the 70s. And I sort of said, well, should I contact, Wayne, who was a teenage kid that the Candyman had used to procure his victims? And this is 11 years ago. And she said, I should, and then I didn't. But now I am talking to him. So I would have never guessed. But because of the BTK thing that I did, the production team urged me to find another serial killer. And I thought, I remember what that psychic said. So I contacted him, and immediately he was very interested in really exploring the grooming process by a serial killer, because that's what had happened to him.
Incredible.
So it was amazing.
I have two questions. Number one, how does the psychic stuff that you've run into tie in with a serial killer and the way their mind works? And number two, how many Hollywood producers remind you of serial killers?
I will not answer the second one because I want to get more work.
Okay.
And I also am executive producer on Murder House Flip, so we can also talk about that, because that was a fun.
I was all ready to ask you. Yeah, I was all ready to ask you about that on Roku television. So we'll hold that. And yes, and I'd love to hear how you answer Don's question.
Well, the psychic stuff doesn't necessarily come into the serial killer stuff unless there is some connection already. Like Dennis Rader did like talking about it, and he likes ghost stories. So in a way, that was a way in. I used also some television shows. We would watch Breaking Bad, The Americans, which is about Soviet spies embedded into America during the Reagan years. And that was his primary metaphor. That's exactly how he felt. This is what I was doing. I was like a spy embedded among normal people, and I was doing this clandestine life, that my family didn't know about, the people in my church didn't know about. So we would use these TV shows to talk about that, or ghost stories or something like that. But the paranormal stuff didn't really figure into the serial killer stuff until this instance where here I am at a place in Savannah, and some ghost is talking to me about the Candyman and his apprentices. And I'm like, now I'm talking to one of them.
Yes. So let's talk about what we just said we were going to talk about, which is Murder House Flip. What does an executive producer do on a TV show like that? Because we see the word. I mean, that thing has like 20 producers. You're one of them.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Used to have only 3.
Yes. Well, that's success for you, isn't it?
Well, no. I say executive producer gives me the privilege of being able to say things that everybody ignores.
Oh, there you go. That's an important part of the whole process.
Right.
It's very much like being a bassist in a band, because that's exactly what my experience as a bassist. No one ever asks the bassist anything. No one wants to know what the bassist thinks. So anyway.
Well, they do ask. They just don't care what I have to say.
This is it. We have opinions. No one cares.
And part of it is that I'm not really in Hollywood. I'm an outsider, but I'm the one who brought the idea to them. It happened in my classroom. I teach a class on serial killers, and we were talking about a house where a triple homicide had happened. And one of my students came in one day and said, "Do you know the house is for sale?" And bang, bang, bang. Right? I love home improvement shows. It all just came together in this mashup that I thought my partner in Hollywood was just going to laugh at, but he immediately said, "Oh my God, write up a treatment." And I had a blast pitching this everywhere, all over Hollywood. It was so much fun. Everyone told me, "Oh, this is so original. This is wonderful." We actually sold it 3 different times. But
Right.
the first time, the guy who bought it in the room was not allowed to do that. He wasn't. He was like upper echelons, but not the top. And the top person said, "What are you thinking?" And then we sold it to another group that wanted to take out the design part, and we said, no, that's what the show's about.
Yeah.
Go into a murder house, you make over the murder spot, you give the homeowners a new place to live, and you don't take that out. So we took it back, and then this was interesting. Right before the pandemic, Jeffrey, what was his name? Steven Spielberg was part of this. I can't think of the guy's name. He used to be head of Disney. Jeffrey with a K. Anyway, so he puts together this idea of doing everything on cell phones. So we'd have these 8-minute bites, and people could watch on their cell phone. And he thought, and so it was this new idea, and everybody thought it was going to be brilliant. And Steven Spielberg actually looked at our show and said, this is either going to be the worst thing we ever did or the best thing we ever did. So it went really well.
I'm thinking Jeffrey Katzenberger.
Katzenberg. It was Quibi. They came up with it, quick bites, Quibi.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So he came up with this idea. He bought our show. He was all excited about it. Everybody was excited about it. We met their team, did all kinds of stuff, did 4 houses, and then they crashed and burned because of the pandemic. It didn't work out for them. So then Roku purchased everything that they had and gave us a second season. So the second season it was 6 houses and each was half an hour instead of bites of 6 to 8 minutes. Each is half an hour, and we're waiting with bated breath to see if we'll get a third season, because the second season just ran in August.
Right. That's exciting. I mean, do you help with ideas? Do you help identifying houses?
Yes.
I mean, do you go to writing sessions as an executive producer? Do you sit in on writing sessions?
I don't get to do that because there's not really writing sessions. It's it's a different. It's different. I have been in writers' rooms because I've done some consulting for Hollywood, but they don't really. They do this in an unusual way. But I mean, I've been invited to go to where they're fixing the house up, but it means canceling class to fly to California to come back. And usually I can't do that because they only spend a week in each house, and so you have to be in and out quickly.
I should say there's a strong element of reality TV in Murder House Flip as well, so that there is that sense of spontaneity, that sense of anything can happen. Anybody could say anything, Well,
it happened. There. We had one where the women who lived there were telling us where the murder room was, and that wasn't where it was. And we redid that whole space, and then found out from the landlord, oh no, that's not where it was. Another one was where a man had murdered his wife, dismembered her, and was cooking her in a pot on a stove when he was arrested.
As one does. Yes, as one does.
Right? And he had murdered her in the bathroom and in the shower, and they had not changed that out. It was called the Blue Murder House. Yeah. And we pulled up the tile floor, and it was there was blood under it. Huh. And as they're pulling it up, a light was playing on the guy who was pulling up the tile floor, and he's going, "Who's got a flashlight in here?" And nobody.
Oh, no.
So that was creepy. Everybody was sending videos back and forth to, oh my God, what's going on here? This house is haunted. So we had things like that happen where you didn't expect things to happen the way they did. And that's the fun part. And some of that gets into the show.
Well, can I say that in all the years of watching This Old House, I'm surprised they've never come across one that's haunted, because they work on like houses that were built in 1820.
Well, I think they have. They just don't say it.
Maybe.
I'm sure of it. I'm
Maybe
sure
we
that
get-
I can't tell you how many murder houses I found. There's actually a website called diedinhouse.com. So if you're thinking of buying a house, you give them $15 and they'll research it and tell you if anyone died there.
Diedinhouse.com.
Diedinhouse.com. Yes.
Oh my God. I mean, I haven't died in this one yet. It's possible, of course. It's always possible.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, John, you could have died 5 years ago and we wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Okay, we need Annie Hunter now.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of Annie, you've got this great new book out, and I would just like, if you can tell us anything about where the new book takes her. I know you're just into it now, but can you give us
the second
hint?
one?
Yeah.
Are you talking about the second one? Will involve a forensic meteorologist. Because you might have noticed there was a hurricane in the first one.
Right.
I want weather in every book.
Yes.
So the next one will have a tornado that hits a prison.
Wow.
And so they bring in a forensic meteorologist. So you get to learn all kinds of cool things from what she knows and some of the new devices they're using to find bodies. That's what I really want to use these books for in some ways, is the new stuff on the horizon in forensics. Annie gets to try them out, and there are things that people might even only be in the idea stages, but Annie says, "Oh, let's use my team as an experimental subject," and so I do that in the next one. Yep, and she ends this book with an idea of what she wants to find is her missing best friend from childhood. And so, of course, the next one's going to take her in that direction.
Well, you've made me an Annie Hunter fan, and I can't wait. I can't wait for this new book. I just think it's going to be splendid. Katherine Ramsland, thank you for coming on the musical Innertube. We've had a conversation, I guarantee you, like none other that we've ever had before.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So I hope you will come back again before too long to talk about one of the many other things that you're into and doing and interested in, because really this, as I said in starting this just scratches the surface of so many interesting areas that your brain has glommed onto.
And Katherine, I don't know if this counts, but I knew you'd be good.
Well, thank you so much. And I had so much fun doing this. I'm so happy you invited me.
Thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Check out our website at musicalinnertube.com, where you'll find all our episodes, profiles of our guests, and lots of extras. You'll even be able to leave us a voicemail.
Our email address is musicalinnertube@gmail.com. On Twitter, our handle is minnertube. Capitalize the M and I.
The Innertube is available on Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, and iHeartRadio podcasts. Like us and give us a good review on any of those platforms.
And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.